worshipper, lover of living. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come, 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 whoever you are. Condemn, worshipper, whoever you're leaving. Ours is no caravan of disbelieving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, cover you are. Condemn, worshipper, whoever you're leaving. Ours is no caravan of disbelieving. Come yet again, come.
You are welcome here.
No matter your religious beliefs or lack of belief, you are welcome here.
No matter your age, sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity, you are welcome here.
No importa tu ciudadanía, tú estás bienvenido aquí.
No matter your citizenship, politics,
or relationship status.
No matter your physical characteristics or health, you are welcome here.
Whoever you are, wherever you are from,
you are welcome in this place. Good morning and welcome to the online worship for the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Montgomery, August 16, 2020. My name is Lynn Hopkins, and it is my honor to serve this congregation as its minister, and I'm so glad that you join us here this morning. I would like to invite you into this hour of worship with words from John Corrado. We believe there is a place at God's table for each and every child of earth. Hey, ain't that good news? We believe the giver of life has been given many names and loves the givers of all of them. Hey, ain't that good news? We are more interested in getting heaven into people now than getting people into heaven later. Hey, ain't that good news? We believe religious scriptures are open doors rather than sealed vaults, and that there is still some holy writ yet to be written. Hey, ain't that good news? We believe true evangelism is more preaching practiced than practiced preaching. Hey, ain't that good news? We believe peace and justice are not just words we form with our lips, but realities we shape with our lives. Hey, ain't that good news? We believe in one race, the human race. We believe we are one with stars and trees and tigers and rivers and all the stuff of life. Hey, ain't that good news? We believe our lives are about growing hearts that love, minds that seek, and hands that serve. Hey, ain't that good news? Amen. I invite all those who would like to join me in speaking our congregational covenant. We, the members and friends of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Montgomery, promise to serve our community with open minds, willing hearts, and helping hands as we respect one another, honoring that our perceptions may differ, value our differences, working to better understand them in conflict, give joyfully of ourselves, being in harmony with our capabilities, and embrace our connections with each other, nature, the global community, and the great mystery of life. We will now hear from our coordinator of religious education, Roger Burdett, with A Time for All Ages.
Hi, and welcome to Time for All Ages. Well, I got our book that we've been going through, the Book of Virtues, which we're reading with permission from the publisher, Simon & Schuster. I got the book and looked for stories or poems about perseverance, because I think some of us could use some encouragement in that area. We're going through tough times. I'm a teacher. I never thought that I would be teaching in an environment like this. It's tough. Parents never thought they would be going through this. Students, the same thing. So many of us are going through some tough times. So I found a poem in the Book of Virtues. The author is not listed. The name of the poem is You Mustn't Quit. When things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high, and you want to smile, but you have to sigh. When care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but never quit. Life is queer with its twists and turns, as every one of us sometimes learns. And many a failure turns about when he might have won if he had stuck it out. Stick to your task, though the pace seems slow. You may succeed with one more blow. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tint of the clouds of doubt, and you never can tell how close you are. It may be near when it seems afar. So stick to the fight when you're hardest hit. It's when things seem worst that you mustn't quit. Well, today I have an extra. Periodically, we've been focusing on this little booklet, The Anxiety Blob, Comfort and Encouragement Guide by Sweatpants and Coffee. I did get in touch with the founder of Sweatpants and Coffee. Her name is Nania Hoffman, and she said it's great that we're doing this, and she gives us full permission. So today, I'm going to focus on a little exercise that I'm sure everybody could do, because it asks you to take 10 minutes and do nothing. Okay? Set a digital timer for 10 minutes. And then close your eyes and do absolutely nothing until the timer goes off. Let your mind wander wherever it likes, and then come back to this page, or you can get a piece of paper and describe where your mind went in those 10 minutes. I hope that helps you find some strength and perhaps release. And I really hope that you have a good week.
It is the practice in our community to take a moment to lift up and let go the things that we carry in our hearts through the week. These are fraught times, and many of us carry a great deal more than any one person can manage. And so I invite you to use this space, the chat box adjacent to the video, to offer the things that are on your heart, the joys as well as the concerns, the pains, the celebrations, the worries, the questions, whatever it is that you carry this morning. I invite you to offer it up to your fellows gathered here in worship, that we may better know and connect with one another and hold one another close in our hearts, even as we are physically separated. let us just take this moment in this important ritual of communal prayer, meditation, and fellowship.
For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandmother's dreamings. We are the breath of the ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage, fathers of time, daughters of dust, sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy, brothers of love, lovers of light, and builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith, makers of peace, wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of the ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We're mothers of courage and fathers of time. We're daughters of dust and sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy and brothers of love. We're lovers of light and builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We're makers of peace and wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of the ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are one. For many years, our congregation has had a practice of sharing the undesignated Sunday morning offering with an organization doing the work on the ground to which we are dedicated in principle. Of course, these days, we don't pass the collection plate in service, but the needs are still present and ever more pressing these days. For this quarter, we have selected the Emergency Resource Program of Montgomery Pride United. Our own Thane Miles has been in leadership of that program since its beginning, and we now hear a few words from him about this important work, as we are honored and grateful to have this opportunity to connect with the larger community and to put our principles and values into action in the world.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Montgomery Pride United, I'd like to say thank you for your continued support. Shortly after arriving in Montgomery, I was introduced to Montgomery Pride United, where I met the founders, Meta Ellis and Emma McDaniel, who were both so friendly, caring, loving, genuine, and warm. I knew from the start that we were kindred spirits and would get along just fine. As 2019 ushered in, I became increasingly involved with volunteer efforts and their day-to-day activities and issues that the organization faced. I feel good about being able to provide help, a listening ear, a chat, a hug, or any other number of ways that people often need to feel that they are heard, acknowledged, and validated. I help with taking in the many donations by receiving items such as clothes, appliances, home decor, jewelry, toiletries, art, etc., all to be cleaned, repurposed, and priced for resale. We strive so hard to become ambassadors of our LGBTQ community by being present and active with understanding the concerns and needs that many are faced with, from being rejected by family, friends, and displaced from their homes, losing their jobs, struggling with their identity, and in many cases, the inability to keep up with the day-to-day rising costs of healthcare and food. We at Montgomery Pride United are here to serve our local LGBTQ community, and in doing so, we have created a new program called the Emergency Resource Program, of which I'm a founding member of and its newly appointed program director. The Emergency Resource Program is designed to help those in the most need. We offer an array of services such as a food pantry, clothing, personal items, utilities when they are shut off, transportation to doctor's appointments, and assistance with paying medical and dental bills. We also partner with the Family Sunshine Center to help the LGBTQ members who disproportionately suffer from domestic violence and are frequently disowned by their families. Every donation can help expand our goals to service others. During COVID-19, if you would like to visit or drop off items, our hours of operation are Tuesdays and Fridays only, from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Central Time. We can be found on Facebook, and our address is 635 Madison Avenue, Montgomery, Alabama. Thank you.
So I hope that you will be as generous as you are able. There is a donation link on our website. As always, you can mail a check or use your bank bill pay system. Any payments received that are not marked as pledge will be split 50-50 between our partner in the community, the Emergency Resource Program of MPU, and the general operating fund of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Montgomery.
May I ever use my hands for lifting up. May I ever use my voice for speaking truth. May I consecrate each day and live with joy and wonder. May I sow in peace as all the wild things do. I will ever use my voice for lifting up. This voice was made for peace. I will ever use my eyes for seeking truth. These eyes were made for truth. I will consecrate each day and live with joy and wonder. I will sow in peace as all the wild things do. There is peace on I will reap in peace as all the wild things do. Wild and precious, we are wild and precious. Life is wild and precious.
It was a little hard for me to pin down my topic for this week. I've been working through a series on expressions of love, and I still have more. But it felt like a moment to take a pause, a break from that. And I was in a conversation this week with some members talking about what was up my sleeve for this Sunday, talking about big ideas, deep thoughts, challenging propositions, and someone said, hey, folks need some encouragement. And I responded, me too. What you got? That's when I knew. One thing I have learned on this journey is when you need some good news, the answer is to go make some. Now, that's not an answer that works all the time, of course. When we are weary and weighed down with the heavy sadness of everything falling down around us, when we are struggling with internal turmoil and external strife, when we are struggling to endure the experience of depression in our daily life, the idea that we should just go out and make something right can feel like just another obligation that we lack the power to fulfill. The last thing we need. When we need a word of hope, the last thing we need is more shame in our imagined inadequacies. Because even when you can't feel it, the truth remains constant and reliable. You are enough. The best you can do in this moment is enough. The love that was there for us in our times of joy is still there. The hope that was so clear in easier times is still true even when you can't feel it. These times are unstable, exciting, frightening, maddening, confusing, strange. This past week brought wonderful historic newness in our political world as well as dark new threats. And the same may be true in our personal lives, which are never fully separate from the outside events, but can often seem even more turbulent and menacing and bewildering. So today, I decided I just needed to get back to some basic truth of why we come together, why there is such a thing as the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Montgomery, why I stay up late to make sure all the pieces are in place and then get up early on Sunday morning, even though I don't have to go anywhere. For me personally, especially, it's why I stepped off a potentially lucrative path and dove headlong into this odd, unpredictable, inexplicable life of ministry. Every so often, I think we all need to hear that good news again, the good news of Unitarian Universalism, maybe for the first time in a single package. The good news is too big for a single sermon or a year of sermons. It takes a lifetime. And each time we just break off a tiny bit to explore. And it's true. But there are times that we need to see the big picture and know that there is an ultimate unified word of promise and assurance that doesn't have to have anything to do with the idea of a God or an afterlife or a religious institution. Just remind me there's a reason that I keep doing this, even when I can't string two sentences together. Remind me that the ultimate truth that saved me from self-destruction and an early grave is still true and powerful. Remind me that the possibility of healing and connection is still real and present, and that the opportunity to create beloved community and make meaning on this earth is still at hand. That need is always there. And it isn't a need that's new to our generation, obviously. And I want to start by looking back about 50 years to one of the great Unitarian prophets of the 20th century, probably the most prominent of all Unitarian Universalist voices of the century, who wrestled with understanding and articulating the life-saving truths, the history-shaping truths of Unitarian Universalism. James Luther Adams, like many of us, had a winding journey to liberal religion. He started with an upbringing in conservative Christianity, went through his evangelical phase, and finally came to rest in a liberal faith that gave shape to his life and work. He visited Europe as the Nazi movement was taking hold and found religious institutions desperately wanting in their response. He worked in the U.S. in academia in the 60s and 70s and found the liberal religious institution lacking in a meaningful message. All of this seemed like just feel-good, lightweight, self-help, motivational drivel when it comes to facing the harsh realities of human life. For him, there was so much more to it. And his flagship work on being human religiously grew out of this lifelong struggle. One of the essays in this book identified 5 smooth stones of Unitarian Universalism. And for those of us who were not raised in a traditional Sunday school environment, you may not know the title refers to the story of David and Goliath. Goliath was an enormous and fearsome Philistine warrior who threatened the people of Israel constantly. And the people lived in this shadow of an ogre who took delight in taunting them about their weakness and the futility of resistance. So David was a young boy, a shepherd boy. He stood up to face this menace with nothing more than a slingshot and 5 smooth stones. And thus he brought the giant to the ground and saved the people of Israel. For Adams, there was an analogy here to the role that liberal religion plays in an environment of both religious and secular institutions that just constantly seek to beat down human potential, to abuse and manipulate and oppress human beings and the natural world in order to amass and reinforce power. Adams believed, and I do too, that Unitarian Universalism offers insight and inspiration that truly can heal this broken world and bring hope to desperate lives. 5 smooth stones, a handful of ideas capable of bringing down the greatest existential threats. Could it be so? Maybe that's too easy. It certainly is true that there is no single book, no one voice, no particular location or ritual for the source of wisdom and life-giving truths that we pursue. But Adams saw a need and set about to lay out a set of principles that could unite and help us all to see the pathway of liberal religion more clearly, to see it more clearly as a shared path in our diversity, so that we could not only stay on the path, but help others, help one another to continue on the path as companions in the journey, even as we cannot know where it leads. The essay is long and it's full of fine and fancy academic theological language. So a lot of folks have made efforts to boil these 5 points down into a set of 5 sentences or 5 phrases or even 5 words. Because of the depth of Adam's thinking and the breadth of his spiritual understanding, each one of these points is open to a variety of understandings. There isn't nearly enough time to do it justice this morning. Nonetheless, I have this yearning, and maybe there are others as well, to just take a moment and sit with the larger truths of Unitarian Universalism. So let's take a stab at it. First, to borrow the words of a 19th century poet and Unitarian minister, Samuel Longfellow, revelation is not sealed. That is to say, whatever it is in which we find ultimate meaning, whatever is the source of life and the giver of truth, whatever we offer our attention and devotion to in this life, hasn't finished speaking. If it's a worthy object of our attention, then surely it is alive or in motion in some sense. And these are a few of the words that James Luther Adams used to describe this first smooth stone. Meaning has not been finally captured. Nothing is complete. And thus, nothing is exempt from criticism. The ground for this first tenet is the human dependence for being and freedom upon a creative power and upon processes not ultimately of our own making. The liberal's ultimate faith is not in himself. We find ourselves to be historical beings, living in nature and history, and having freedom in nature and history. One way of characterizing this meaning is to say that through it, God is active or in the process of self-fulfillment in nature and history. To be sure, the word God is so heavily laden with unacceptable connotations that it is, for many people, scarcely usable without confusion. It is therefore well for us to indicate briefly what the word signifies here. In considering this definition, however, the reader should remember that among liberals, no formulation is definitive and mandatory. Indeed, the word God may be, in the present context, replaced by the phrase that which ultimately concerns humanity, or that in which we should place our confidence. The liberal's faith, therefore, is a faith in the giver of being and freedom. Dignity derives from the fact that we participate in the being and freedom of this reality. In that passage, as throughout the first section of this essay, he talks a great deal about freedom. And the second, Smooth Stone, specifically focuses on freedom. That is, the freedom of association, the necessity that all human relationships be voluntary. He says it this way: the second major principle of religious liberalism is that all relations between persons ought ideally to rest on mutual free consent and not on coercion. Of course, Orthodox mentors will claim that the reason we need a divine guide in a book or church doctrine. Further, they sometimes tell us that the mortal sin of the liberal is the unwillingness to submit to divine authority, and that this unwillingness grows out of intellectual pride. But what the Orthodox overlooks is this: the most pretentious pride of all is that of those who think themselves capable of recognizing infallibility, for they must themselves claim to be infallible in order to identify the infallible. In contrast, the liberal seeks, in the words of the prophets, in the deeds of saintly men and women, and in the growing knowledge of nature and human nature provided by science meanings that evoke the free loyalty and conviction of people exposed to them in open discourse. Freedom is one of the divine shared principles of liberal religion. Without it, it is difficult to imagine that anything else that we do makes sense. And the third smooth stone is the divine principle of justice. Justice is not simply a secular or political matter for Adams. It is a fundamental underlying religious principle. It is at the very center of all that we do. He says it in this way: a faith that is not the sister of justice is bound to bring us to grief. The community of justice and love is not an ethereal fellowship that is above the conflicts and turmoils of the world. It is one that takes shape in nature and history, one that requires the achievement of freedom with respect to material resources as well as with respect to spiritual resources. Indeed, the one kind of freedom is not fully authentic without the other. Freedom, justice, and love require a body as well as a spirit. We do not live by spirit alone. A purely spiritual religion is a purely spurious religion. It is one that exempts its believer from surrender to the sustaining, transforming reality that demands the community of justice and love. This sham spirituality, far more than materialism, is the great enemy of religion. That, I think, is one of the most potent and compelling passages of Adams that I encountered when I was first exposed to this work. This idea that a religious system, a faith, a spiritual movement that is not entirely entwined and engaged directly with physical life, the material reality of our existence, is a sham. And furthermore, he says, this sham spirituality, more even than materialism, this sham spirituality is the great enemy of religion. As we are engaged in a movement of liberal religion that is directly touching the earthly material lives of each one of us, the fourth smooth stone identifies the institution of religious community as important to this pursuit. James Luther Adams says, we deny the immaculate conception of virtue and affirm the necessity of social incarnation. It is not possible for us to engage in a meaningful way, in a lasting and significant way, with either the spiritual well-being or the physical well-being of our fellow humans or of the earth itself without gathering in community. James Luther Adams talked a great deal about social institutions, about the way that voluntary associations need to understand themselves and their role in the world in order to remain true to the mission, the purpose to which they are called. And so he says, there is no such thing as goodness as such, except in a limited sense. There's no such thing as a good person as such. There is the good husband, the good wife, the good worker, the good employer, the good lay person, the good citizen. The decisive forms of goodness in society are institutional forms. No one can properly put faith in merely individual virtue, even though that is a prerequisite for societal virtues. The faith of the liberal must express itself in societal forms, in the forms of education, in economic and social organization, in political organization. Without these, freedom and justice in community are impossible. The creation of justice in community requires the organization of power, and through the organization of power, liberated persons tie into history. Otherwise, they cannot achieve freedom in history. Injustice in community is a form of power and abuse of power, and justice is an exercise of just and lawful institutional power. This is the one of the five, the fourth smooth stone, that I find my colleagues have had the most difficulty isolating into a single word. Usually they settle on institution, which clearly meant a different thing from what it might connote in the usage today. Here, when he talks about institution, he's talking simply about the act of coming together and creating, forming a body, instituting a thing, so that the congregation of liberal religious believers, the fellowship or ethical society, or even church, if I dare, that institution is a necessary part of what it means to be in the liberal religious movement that gives our life meaning. There is not a way to have a direct impact, to have any meaningful impact at all on the world. There is not a way to build beloved community. There is not a way to practice and share love, healing, and reconciliation without the institution. This is why there is a Unitarian Universalist Association that seeks to support and facilitate the work of all the independent congregations. And this is why we come into a space of worship, why we sign our names to a book of membership, and why we find it worth the use of our personal power, that is, our financial resources, to support and sustain the existence of such an institution. The institution is what makes the activity and life of liberal religion possible in a social world. And finally, the fifth smooth stone is hope. Persistent, authentic, real, earthly hope. it's a complicated word, right? And you know, I have repeatedly talked about hope as pointing to possibility. We are not hoping for a thing in specificity. We are not attaching ourselves or our aspirations to an object in the future, but rather by living in hope, we are insisting on the worth, the value of life itself, and the connection that we make between and among one another, the love that we share in our work, trying to build beloved community on this earth. James Luther Adams, as I mentioned, had spent some time in a Europe which was under the menacing clouds of totalitarianism and what would ultimately be a horrifying, horrific Holocaust. Enormous, incomprehensible loss and devastation. Human beings engaging in acts that could only be called evil toward other human beings. So he was not unaware or unmindful of the reasons for despair. But even so, he says, still, there is something in the genuine liberal perspective that, while recognizing this tragic nature of the human condition, continues to live with a dynamic hope as one of its voices. It is a mood that derives ultimately from the ancient prophets and from the white-hot heart of the New Testament. Yet liberalism denies to its peril that it was brought into being by people who, like the prophets and the eschatologist of Nazareth, turned from retrospect to prospect. The affirmative action of prophetic religion, which may be heard in the very midst of the doom that threatens like thunder, is that history is a struggle in dead earnest between justice and injustice, looking towards the ultimate victory in the promise and fulfillment of grace. Thus, with all the realism and tough-mindedness that can be mustered, the genuine liberal finally can hear and join the Hallelujah chorus. Intellectual integrity, social relevance, amplitude of perspective, and the spirit of true liberation offer no less. Hallelujah. These are, to be sure, challenging times. And yet, just by entering into this space this morning, you have affirmed a commitment to something more than what is falling down around us. A commitment to ongoing newness. The notion that what we know today is by no means all that is to be known. And that all of this continues to grow and mature and develop. Second, you have affirmed that freedom is an essential value of human religious practice. True relationship among human beings must be of mutual consent. Free association is absolutely necessary for authentic connection. Third, you affirm the idea that justice is at the heart of genuine religious pursuit, that there can be no ultimate truth in what we believe and what we practice if it does not involve the affirmation and promotion of the worth and dignity of every human being. Fourth, in gathering here today, we acknowledge that there is something essential in gathering, in forming associations, in claiming our unified path, our shared journey, honoring one another's differences, celebrating our diversity, growing from the exposure and encounter with new perspectives and understandings, coming together, forming, instituting a body is a necessary element of our religious practice. And finally, what Unitarian Universalism holds for us is that hope is always present, because the truth, the power, the voice of authority is within human hearts and human minds. We do not depend on an external force to define our destiny. It is up to us. And if it is up to us, then possibility always remains. There is something worthwhile in simply gathering here and saying, yes, 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 we believe and hold fast to these ideas, these 5 smooth stones in which there is the power to bring down giants. Ongoing revelation, free association, the pursuit of justice, the formation of human institutions, and the persistence of hope. There is good news. Next week, I want to talk about 5 different stones of Unitarian Universalism, because about 40 years after James Luther Adams published this work, a small group of folks out in Denver wrestled with their own understanding of current day Unitarian Universalism and set about to compose the 5 jagged rocks of Unitarian Universalism. These happen to be friends of mine. I have a personal fondness for this work, but I think too that it offers a great deal of depth and wisdom and encouragement in our religious journey. So join us next week for the 5 jagged rocks, and stay with us, or that is, move over to Zoom with us. At 11 o'clock, we'll begin second hour, and just hang out over in Zoom for social time, conversation, and some exploration of these and other religious ideas as our spiritual journeys continue to touch one another and grow from one another. For now, our service has ended. May our service begin.
My hands are strong enough, they're strong enough, and I'm good enough. My hands are strong enough to give love. I know that my arms are long enough, they're long enough, and I'm good enough. My arms are long enough to give love. I know that my heart is wide enough, it's wide enough, I'm good enough. My heart is wide enough to give love. I know that My light is bright enough, it's bright enough, I'm good enough. My light is bright enough to give love. And my heart is wide enough to give love. I know that my arms are long enough to give love. My hands are strong enough to give love. Uh-oh. What problem is this? Not a problem at all. We fix. Boom. 1, 2, 3.